Hi, welcome back to another episode of the South Texas Power Hour. I'm here with Roman Sandoval from Allosense Inc. And I'm excited to share with you another one of the upcoming and notable startups here in San Antonio and South Texas. These guys have been featured in the Business Journal and a whole lot of accolades for the company here. Thanks so much for coming to hang out with us for a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matthew.
What I wanted to do and what I'm always excited to hear, and I know that our listeners are, is how did you get to this point? Like, give us the journey for you. You're a young guy. I'm much older than you. I remember when I was as young as you are, but you've had a lot of success. How did you get here? Tell us about college all the way through where you are today. Tell us about the birth of Allosense.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an engineer turned CEO and founder of Allosense.
Okay.
Technically, we started in 2020, January 2nd, 2020, so
Okay.
fairly small. But in terms of my university and the college I went to Penn State University, graduated with a computer engineering and engineering entrepreneurship degree, which was technically a minor at that time.
Really?
Yeah. And then following that, I did a bit of work in night vision goggle systems for the Army Rangers, worked at National Instruments out in Austin, Texas, and then from there moved to Silicon Valley, worked at Apple, Intel, and most recently Tesla.
Okay.
So we did a little bit of software integration work on high volume test and measurement systems.
Okay.
And integrated test systems for what they call new product introductions. From that point on, in 2018, I departed, worked on a bit of nuclear test systems, still leveraging my experience in software engineering and test integration. And I decided to move to San Antonio out of love because my wife lives here, and I wanted to build a family out here, which frankly, right now, I have a family here in San Antonio. So when I left Tesla, regarding sort of the work I was doing as an engineer, I wanted to be part of a startup. And my engagement in a startup was in geekdom. So I co-founded another company called Ramp Robotics.
Okay.
At that time, it was Trinicorp Robotics. And technically, I was one of the first employees, a co-founder, if you will, but it was Mel Du that had founded it. He was on a wheelchair. He was creating a new wheelchair product to help persons who were paraplegic. And through that initial startup, we were engaged with Techstars. So in 2019, I went to Techstars Boulder in Colorado and had a blast there. Understood a bit more about venture capital and went through the startup journey, if you will. My co-founders at that time, Mel and Amro and myself, frankly speaking, Mel and Amro wanted to stay in Boulder, Colorado, and me trying to build a family out here in San Antonio, I decided that it was probably best for me to come back in San Antonio. So following Techstars 2019, I then decided to create a new startup. And that startup is Allosense Inc.
Great.
And what Allosense Inc. does is we are an Internet of Things company. We make small devices, sensors, connected sensors, if you will, and measurement systems. And we won a Department of Defense contract through AFWorks, through the SBIR, Small Business Innovation and Research Open Topic. And that was our initial engagement with working with the DoD. Following that, we continued to work with large enterprises in the electric vehicle space. And now, since 2020, our team is growing. We're 6 full-time employees, and we're cash flow positive and going through our next seed round. So overall, from the start of an engineering career, working in these larger engagements and companies, I got to develop my skill sets in engineering and then create a company in 2020.
Why, I'm always curious, why did you decide that the corporate life was not for you? It sounds like very early on you wanted to do, venture-backed startups and be an entrepreneur. What was it for you that was that was so definite for you coming out of college? Why the entrepreneur track?
Yeah. For me, I love like engineering. I love tinkering. I love making things, sensors, if you will. And what I found was that with working with larger corporations, you become a small piece in the machine.
Right.
And what happened, I guess, in some of these engagements is that I was constantly developing code on my own, delivering it for a system, and frankly speaking, I just wanted to build things with other people as well. And so I was thinking to myself, perhaps there's going to be a time when the people I enjoy working with at these different companies, perhaps there will be a time when I get to re-engage with them in a different type of capacity, where I get to build an environment that embraces engineering, that develops products that are renowned and that has great showmanship, and build an awesome culture that is product and engineering focused. And,
right.
And that's essentially what I wanted to make here at Allosense. And that's what started, I guess, that journey.
So it's interesting, and maybe you can help me tell me a little bit about your thought is, you talk a lot about the love for engineering and the love for design and the integration, which is great. And I want to come back to ask you some more questions about Allosense and some of your customer base and kind of how you apply that. But let's talk about being a CEO. Very different than the career. I mean, a CEO, it's like a coach of a team. They love the sport. I'm a soccer guy. I love football as well. You get to move to a different chair. You don't actually get to play the game, but you get to support the game and do those kind of things that coaches do, but you're not in the game. Right. How has that been for you? I mean, how do you view your role as the CEO? How has that been to adjust to more of that, much more broader, like how are we going to make payroll and cash flow and making strategic decisions? How has that been for you?
Yeah, I think if I'm looking from the perspective of my journey, right? So as an engineer, I'm very sort of vertically knowledgeable about specific topics, RF, engineering, electrical engineering, things of that sort, programming. Becoming a CEO and also being responsible for multiple people in the team and growing the business allows me to sort of exercise more horizontally. So learning more about law, finances, going through the books, working with CPA, and finding the appropriate advisors and mentors for the company. I can't say that it was easy at first to learn these aspects. I think over time, you get used to having conversations with specialists. And that's essentially what has helped me sort of move into this role of CEO by simply working with amazing people. Some of whom are here in San Antonio. One person that we love working with is Linda Loftus from Loftus Consulting. Amazing person who has done amazing administrative work, going through stock vesting, going through different types of debts, convertible debt rounds, and just going through the administrative work in the company. I think working with various experts in the field has helped me grow as a CEO, and also has helped me learn more about what this role entails.
For an entrepreneur that's very young in their journey for their company, what are some key considerations for finding the right outside consultants and teammates that are going to help you with that horizontal approach?
Interviews. I mean, like,
well, what are you interviewing? Okay, so interviews. How are you interviewing? Walk us through what that looks like for you to be able to pick them, because I'm sure you didn't pick. I mean, if you got a 100% picker, we're going to go to Vegas and put some money down. I'm sure you've had some that you learned some lessons. What are some of those lessons that you learned from those interviews or whatever the process was?
Yeah, I think it all starts in the needs of the company, right? So if I'm going through a fundraising round, I think I would have to understand more about, hey, what is the current status of the company, and where we currently are in regards to our responsibilities and the terms on convertible debt notes, safe notes, and where our investors want to go. So understanding the needs of the company and then having the necessary interviews to fulfill those needs is essentially the approach that I try to take. When it comes to all these different domains of expertise, whether it's legal or say like finances, I think what was the impetus for me to find the necessary experts was in our safe notes and in our convertible debt notes, there's a requirement to have qualified CPAs involved
Right.
as we go to our next round. And so in preparation for these next rounds, those are the needs that I have identified and our team has identified to qualify the individuals coming into the company to help meet those qualifications, if you will.
Got it. So let's go back to, you had mentioned, you got one of the innovation grants that were out there in dealing with, the DoD and the government. When dealing with government grants in order to fund a business and a startup, what are some of the lessons you learned, maybe a couple of lessons you've learned that could help somebody that's thinking about this as a potential, capital opportunity for their company?
Yeah, so working with the DoD is a fairly arduous process, just so you know.
You just say working with the government and then fill in whatever you want to put after that.
Yeah, government, DoD, federal agencies and whatnot. There are rules and regulations for which small businesses and startups have to abide by in order to produce product and services to the federal government. And so I'd say overall, the process that we took was a stance of compliance, first and foremost, and then excitement, frankly, because the contract vehicle that we were awarded was an AFWERX SBIR, Small Business Innovation and Research, open topic contract, which essentially funds and grants R&D work to be performed that will eventually be used for a specific need within that agency or the branch, which is the Air Force. And the reason why I said it's exciting is because a SBIR open topic allows companies, small businesses, and startups to simply put an idea out there and get some backing from various stakeholders within their branch to say, yeah, this is an idea that we need to have executed. This is a specific need within our area of expertise, and we would very much like to see this technology. And so that's why I think it's exciting, because to begin with, you match a problem set with a solution, and the company, which is Allosense, has provided a potential solution for that problem.
So you essentially got your validation of your business opportunity and market fit and funding all wrapped up in together. How have investors viewed the fact that you did get those grants and use that early on in your company?
I think it's a proof point of validation. I think one of the biggest KPIs for I think investors is revenue. And
that's a big one.
Yeah, revenue and money, I guess, right? So I think there's something to be said about getting money, or a contract, or a R&D type of contract from the military, and it's a proof point. And I think overall, investors see that positively.
That's great. Let's go back to the journey you had, and talk to me a little bit about your customer base. We know you've got the Air Force, that is, a customer of yours. But outside in the public markets, basically, who are your customers for Allosense and the technologies that you guys have developed?
So I can't disclose the names of the
No. Just tell me
customers.
Industries. Yeah, you don't need just what industries are you working in?
So we're actively engaged in the electric vehicle industry, specifically in the production of vehicles and battery packs. And so that has proven to be incredibly profitable for the business, sure. And also I guess is a market that we currently are engaged in.
So, and for that, with your technologies, can you explain a little bit how that works, or maybe in another industry, how the technology you guys are having? I mean, it's an Internet of Things. And so you've got interconnectivity for what you're doing on those sensors. Maybe give an example, doesn't have to be in the car, but give an example of your technology in action that's out there in the marketplace.
Yeah, so what we do at Allosense is we make both sensors and measurement systems.
Okay.
And as part of that, so one example that I think is clear cut is an asset tracker.
Right.
An asset tracker is an Internet of Things device. It connects to an infrastructure. That data from the sensor is then transported from the infrastructure over to the cloud and some sort of destination where it could be analyzed.
Right.
Similarly, in a manufacturing test environment, you have measurement systems that conduct analyses across the assets that are going into the manufacturing lines. It's the software and also a combination of specific hardware that allows the extraction of data from the quality of the battery packs to then be sent into the factory infrastructure.
Nice.
So it's the essentially what we've created is the glue and the infrastructure associated with the extraction of data from these sensors.
Got it. So it's not necessarily the sensor, it's the extraction of the data and then be able to utilize that data real time.
Right.
That you guys have done. That's great. I appreciate that example. What is your, and maybe you can speak to this, is when these grants that you get, these awards that you get, what does that mean for you in the longer term with regard to the relationship when you get these type of grants? Are you restricted? Does the government basically be able to say, hey, when we call, you must come running? How does that work? I mean, the R&D is funded, but can you tell our listeners a little bit about what the ongoing responsibilities of taking a grant like this is?
Yeah, so with the particular grant, like an AFWorks Open Topic, there's different phases. We went through the phase 1, had selectable phase 2, which is a larger amount of money, and then there's phase 3, which is essentially sole sourcing. So once you achieve a initial SBIR phase 1, you have the ability to direct sole source and contract with various branches of the military. It doesn't necessarily have to be with the Air Force. That is sort of the general pathway through these different tranches and phases to further engage with the DoD. And what we've done internally is we've attended various associations and last week we were part of the Logistics Officer Association and met with various airmen to apply our technologies throughout different wings and bases. And so I think overall the strategy is that we take our SBIR award and contract and we're able to leverage that to have additional contracting.
That makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
Let's shift over to fundraising because you guys are about to, you've been through the Capitol, you've got the innovation grant, you guys have had some fundraising rounds. Just before we ever get started, these are things that I always ask guests is overall from fundraising, what's the biggest lesson you've learned?
So fundraising is a fairly difficult task. I think you'll realize that there's a lot of people that will say no until you get a yes. Mm-hmm. And for entrepreneurs, you have to have thick skin. So the number one reason is just get at it and just keep on improving. It's an infinite game, if you will, where you're constantly improving yourself, you're constantly having conversations. And even though there may be investors that say, no, this isn't meeting my thesis or this isn't something that I would invest in, there's surely an investor or two, or maybe a group of investors that would invest in your company. And we're lucky enough to work with some of the best investors. Expa VC, the co-founder of venture capital that's made and created by the co-founder of Uber, had invested in Allosense through its pre-seed round. And frankly speaking, Expa is an amazing investor. In fact, not only did they invest in our company, but they had provided us with additional assistance and support. We go through our pitch deck that we're preparing for our seed round. We have various connections within the industrial space, if you will. And I've grown to really enjoy our relationship with all the individuals at Expo. Lisa, Kristen, Dylan, Maloon, some of the LPs and GPs. Roberto's awesome. And I think is that kind of relationship that I think makes it worthwhile going through the no's and then finding those various gems and amazing VCs along the way that are willing to support the entrepreneurs.
And there's a lot out there that are looking at, early stage companies that come with the support element as well, and not just. One of the things that we've had several people talk about, and we talk about here, and you're an example of that as well, is with money comes responsibility, but with money comes relationship. And so getting that right relationship with that right responsibility can be critical for the rest of your career of your company. Because if you get it wrong at the beginning, you can really kind of handcuff yourself, whether it's you've given up too much control or too much equity, or you valued your company too high. Essentially, there's a lot of things you can do, but it sounds like you got good advice and good mentorship to get through that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a lot about, now you've been in some, pre-seed rounds you mentioned, and you're moving into, your first really big fundraise there on a seed rounds. What are those considerations, those new lessons that you've identified and, are overcoming that you can share with people of raising a significant amount of money to take your company to the next level?
Yeah, I think for us, there was a substantial amount of planning for our seed round. So even before our pre-seed round, we were identifying when should we have a pre-seed round? What are the metrics for which would be useful for closing our seed round? And then for the Series A, that's typically when early investors get their return on their investment. And so going through that fundraising strategy was the initial sort of work that we had performed internally. And to prepare that, especially for our seed round that we're hoping to have, what we're looking at is the market. Like typically for hardware and software companies, what is a typical seed round investment? And we are looking at the market today, and a seed round is about $3 to $8 million, and in between is $5 million, which we think is appropriate for our size and also our revenue and growth of the company. And so to answer your question on sort of what's required in the seed round, I think there's a lot of strategy in place on what does the company need to do, and what will the company use those funds for, and two, what are the similar models that other hardware and software companies are using or have gone through that establishes a good sort of seed round standard, if you will.
How do you prepare yourself for what your investors are going to want? Because what you just described right there is great. It's a great analysis from here's what we need in our justification around our needs, both in total money, key milestones, use of funds. But how do you put yourself into the shoes of your investor? How are you anticipating what they're going to be looking for in what you're doing now?
Yeah, I think fundamentally an investor puts money for an ROI, return on investment. And if you look at what a typical investor would like to see is, 100x times or 12 or 10x.
No, they prefer 100x, not 10 or 12.
Absolutely. Infinity.
Yes.
And so, I mean, that drives the key performance indicators and the perspective on an investor. So I think what an investor would like to see is traction on revenue, at least nowadays, especially with the market being slightly volatile, traction in terms of revenue. How do you have the ability to sort of protect your technology? How defensible is it? What makes you unique as a company? 3 is sort of the team. Is this a team that's going to be able to fully execute the idea that is a big, hairy, audacious goal? Right. And yeah, those are like 3 main concepts that I think an investor would very much like to have answered.
You know, you're the first person that's used the BHAG in my room. I didn't think many people really, you know, talked about that in generations younger, but I think that's fantastic. That just tells me right there is a signal of, you know, how serious you take your, you know, your work as a CEO. So that's great. As we're looking through this from an investor's, you listed 3 things. What do you think is the number one thing they look for? Like if you asked them, because I have asked them, and they've sat in the chair that you're sitting in right now, and so I'm just curious from your perspective, what is the number one thing you think they have?
Yeah, I think depending on the stage, right?
About your stage, because the people we've had in these chairs are early stage. They're looking to take the seed to the first funded round, or priced round. There's been a consistent answer from there, and it wasn't much of a surprise. I hate to put you on the spot, and if you get it wrong, I'm not going to shame you.
Oh gosh!
But what would you think? Because you listed it in your top 3.
Frankly speaking, I think at the current stage that we're in, it would be team. And
you got it right.
Okay, and not just the team too. I think there's an assessment on how coachable the team is and how coachable the CEO is.
Yeah.
And I think I'm happy to say that our investors say that I'm very coachable. So
we use BHAG, so that tells me you take it seriously, because big, hairy, audacious goal, is what people sometimes call the BHAG, for that stuff. So no, that's great. I mean, I've had the conversation with several people. Do you bet on the horse or on the jockey? The horse has got to be good, but I'm betting on the jockey.
Right.
For it, because again, you may find yourself, I hope you don't, but you may find yourself 10 years from now having to make a pivot, and the right team will know when it is right to make that pivot and accomplish the pivot, which an investor wants to ensure that they're able to be agile in a market, because it is a startup. So that was always their answer. So I after you said that, I knew you'd get the right answer, but didn't mean to put that much pressure on you.
You were giving me a clue. You did say it was one of the 3, so thank you for that.
I did. So as you go through all of this, any basic, I was on a panel yesterday with BioFest, and one of the things was, what do investors look like, or not look like, and they look all like just about everybody. What do they look for in a company as far as when they see some of the documents and the diligence? Have you had any experience with that, about how you engage on the detail discussion with them? Any lessons from that?
Well, we haven't officially kicked off our seed round yet, but generally speaking, from conversations I've had in preparations for our seed round, I think one of the things that we're doing internally has been in preparation for that. And it includes setting up our data room. It includes having all our paperwork and ducks in a row. So reviewing our convertible debt notes, reviewing the safe notes, seeing when things are expected to expire, mature, and having summaries associated with those investments. In the end of the day, it's really about treating your investors right and making sure that you're doing the necessary sort of tasks as part of your fiduciary duty as a CEO to ensure that you're building up value, so your par value increases over time. And also just making it easy for people to invest in the company too. So all that preparation work and creating the data room and getting all the summaries together. The reason we're doing that is simply because once an investor says, yes, I want to invest in you. Yes, I think our thesis matches yours. How do we actually transact? That transaction, I think, should be easy and simple. And that's why we're doing all this work to begin with before we actually go through our seed round.
I would tell you, as a lawyer that does these type of deals, I evaluate a lot on behalf of potential investors, angel investors, high net worth individuals. One of the biggest signals to me is the organization. And I will tell you that the ease of, there's lawyers, we always find something to nitpick, but the ease of, we've got a red flag here, high alert, goes way down when I see better organization, good communication, sometimes over communication, just makes the transactions a whole lot smoother. So I think that's a great idea. Tell me, just your experience. You've got now a board. I don't know how big the board is, but you report to a board. You mentioned fiduciary duty. And then you have investors now. Talk about that dynamic that may have been something new for you to know that now you report to a board and you do have investors you have to keep updated on. How does that been for you?
Yeah, so being fairly early stage, I think, and having a very small board, I don't think I'm at liberty to disclose our size just yet.
No, you don't need to.
I think we're having the placeholders to have a shareholder meeting and stockholder meeting, and also having additional formalities with how we conduct ourselves and have board meetings and whatnot. We're in the very beginning side of that,
Right.
but there is a strategy in place that I have enabled for the company, and that strategy is primarily based on books.
Right.
Brad Feld makes an awesome book, just so you know, called Startup Boards.
Yep.
And he talks about just evening out your board, having investors, but also having third parties,
Yep.
independent board members, and then also the founders as you're growing your company. And so it's that strategy and it's that model that I'm planning to have moving forward, especially as we go through our seed and Series A rounds. So I hope I answered your question.
You 100% did. By the way,
Okay.
that's a great book. Venture Deals is another one.
Yes.
That, I tell every single person that's trying to do it to read that one as well. They've got great content. Their website's very good as well for things. No, that's exactly it. I mean, communication is key, and then the only way you're going to have good communication is to have good processes for reporting,
Right.
which is critical. Let me shift a little bit here. It's been a great conversation to talk about San Antonio, because you're here in San Antonio. You've experienced Boulder, you've experienced Austin, you've experienced the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, those type of situations, which are very capital rich, and they have what I would call a very mature infrastructure as far as getting capital deployed.
Right.
Here in San Antonio, we're very young on that. We have some very great players that have been doing it for years, and they're the common names. They've been on this podcast with me as well, but we don't have enough. We've got an angel network that is growing. We've got a couple of groups here. Alamo Angels, we're a part of that. There's Kindle, that they have one as well. We've got more and more money trying to come in, but we don't have a structure. And this is my opinion, not yours. I'm not applying it to you at all. But with that, what are some of the experiences you've had, maybe some opportunities that we as a community need to understand from a founder that's loves San Antonio, loves South Texas, wants to be here? What are some of your experiences with having to deal with being in a very young market with regard to capital ability?
Yeah, I think the San Antonio ecosystem is a hard nut to crack, frankly speaking. I do love the city. In fact, I have a 9-month-old
That's right.
She was born here in the city too.
Where was she born at?
She was born at University Health Hospital.
We were just trying to see. You're okay.
I think. But
it's a blur. Hey,
yeah.
once you actually get out of about 1 year old, you'll actually have a brain. The fog goes away.
I haven't slept much, so yeah, I think
between being a CEO of a startup and having a 9-month-old, I'm sure you haven't.
Yeah. So going back to your question.
Yeah, tell me about the ecosystem and what has been your experience trying to raise capital here in San Antonio?
Yeah, it's been difficult. I think it really depends on also the stage of the company. Typically, when you're like a startup, pre-seed round, going into your seed round, you typically expect safe notes and convertible debt notes, primarily from angels. So
right.
One of the gotchas that I think a lot of startups fail to see is that you have to, if you're going through venture funding, you have to have accredited investors.
Right.
Putting money as angel investors. You can't just have anyone put money into the company. If you do, you are subject to SEC rules and regulations, and that increases your G&A costs and whatnot. So I highly recommend that even before you consider, as an entrepreneur, if you consider getting money, making sure that those investors, those angel investors, are accredited investors. So going into the San Antonio ecosystem, I think, frankly speaking, I think there's a lot of potentially potential accredited investors in our ecosystem, but they're not enabled. They're not familiar with the investment landscape, and perhaps the investment landscape doesn't satisfy their expertise, right? So one example here is in my conversation with Chris Cook. He had said that, hey, Roman, there's a bunch of officers here, retired officers here in San Antonio, Texas.
Right.
More than likely, they qualify as accredited investors, but they're not enabled. There's no main vehicle to do investments for these individuals who could be potential investors to your company or to other companies working in the defense realm. And so I think that is definitely a deficiency here in the community, where we're not enabling potential investors in the San Antonio community as much as we'd like to. And that's what I'm currently seeing. I do think that there is money